دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء قسما بالله رب العالمين ما ارتضينا غير دين الله دين فهو دين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء
هذا الدر وهذه الكلم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار ظلم وحلا في مولده النغم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah and welcome to Finding Me on the ITV networks. Today with me a dynamic and very innovative professor, a young professor I might add. Professor Neil Eccles is the head of department for the Institute for Corporate Citizenship, and he has developed a very amazing and innovative module called Sustainability and Greed, which I think needs much discussion and hopefully will open up the doors to a new thinking in terms of the way in which we view business, in which we view the environment, and all related to ethics and of course to corporate citizenship. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much, Neil, for making this time.
It's a pleasure.
Now, I mean, your module on sustainability and greed is certainly a very, very innovative module. It's a flagship module for your institute. But more importantly, it touches on core concepts, greed, poverty, environment, ethics, etc. How did you put all this together, for economic and management sciences, and what inspired you to plan it the way you did?
So it goes back a long way, but fundamentally, we were always interested in how economic and management sciences students and once they graduate relate to society and the impact of what they will do post graduating on society. And if we look around the world, a lot of people would criticize the role of capitalism and economic and management sciences in terms of some of the ills of our society, greed and sustainability problems. So part of the rationale behind this module was really to try and unsettle economic and management sciences students right at the beginning of their curriculum, to get them to think beyond the narrow confines of their discipline and the canons of the discipline. So the typical capitalist is right kind of narrative which prevails in most economic and management sciences teaching. And so the module is actually about thinking. It's not really about sustainability and greed per se, and it's not really about morality per se. It's really about trying to get students to think. We use issues of sustainability and greed, so massive social problems that we have, and we confront students with moral theories, and then they apply that. And they apply that to those challenges, and those are meant to unsettle their kind of typically capitalist kind of views on society, and I think that was how we came about the basic idea, and we had fun. We were given carte blanche. We were given a job of creating something which would make our students at UNISA better or different to students from elsewhere, and it was just go and do it. So it was a very exciting process.
So one of the core concepts or the core ideas that you touch on is corporate greed, and a major challenge in terms of how corporates are viewed in society, how people justify exorbitant earnings, etc., and the one you particularly mentioned of a particular CEO. And the reality was that just recently there was an article written about him which showed that it would take an ordinary worker close to 300 years to earn the kind of salary that he gets in a year. And so when you look at the responses from the students and you look at the reality that's happening in the world, do you find that in some point in time there is a kind of a critical development where people will begin to question it, or is it that they lapse into this, we are entitled as long as we work?
I think it varies from student to student. So when we started this module, I sort of said, if we can shift the thinking of 10% of the students at UNISA. So 10% of 5,000 students a semester, it's 500 students, that's a plus. So I think we probably have a group of students who have a problem with executive remuneration and the greed and the excesses associated with that. I think we probably have 10% of students who come in with a typical economic and management sciences perspective, which is, that's why I'm doing this degree, because I want to get that salary, right? And then they are confronted by the implications of that sort of salary and what it means in terms of other people's remuneration, whether it's fair in relation to other people's remuneration, and I think it unsettles at least 10% of students. And then I think there's a bunch of students who come in and they're not going to change. They come in with a view that that's their aspiration, and they leave with a view that that's their aspiration, and they'll probably end up as chief executives of major multinational companies because that's what it takes to get to the top of the thing. So I don't think it's about changing the minds of every single student.
No, of course.
It's about being able to change the minds of some, or it's about even if it challenges people to just think about it.
Yes.
And to defend their position better at some later stage, even though it's probably indefensible.
Now, considering that you used that one particular example, recently there was a huge debate, and of course Cyril Ramaphosa pronounced the minimum wage in South Africa. What is your take on the minimum wage, and do you think it is necessary?
Look, I mean, I think we need to take steps to equilibrate, to get our income levels more balanced in South Africa and in the world as a whole, but in South Africa in particular. I mean, it's completely out of control, the gap between the rich and the poor, and it's getting worse, not better. So, and it's not going to get better unless we actively take steps to change it. So I'm a big fan of the minimum wage. I think 3,500 Rand is pretty low. I think the people who are prescribing 3,500 Rand probably wouldn't be able to live on 3,500 Rand. And I look at myself here. I probably spend that, I don't know, in 2 weeks on groceries for my family. So even the minimum wage is low. But what's fascinated me about the minimum wage discussion is the kind of imperialism of ratings agencies in association with that. So just before the elections, I think it was the local government elections, there was this message on the radio from the ratings agencies, who we are incredibly fearful of, which said they're worried about what do they call it? Populist steps, like a minimum wage. And I'm thinking, those so-and-sos are sitting in London or in New York. Well, I don't know if the Americans have a minimum wage, they probably don't. But in Europe, there's minimum wages. And here they are telling us that it's unacceptable to have minimum wages. For Africa to have minimum wages. Where do they get off telling Africa that that's unacceptable? I mean, on what planet is it unacceptable for people to have a minimum wage? And even a minimum wage as low as 3,500.
Yes, that's right. And that is also not right across the board, because I mean, for domestic workers, it's still at about 2,000.
Have exclusions and all sorts of strange things. It's really outrageous. When you look at people, I mean, the example in my module has an annual income of 620 million. I think the highest recorded in South Africa was 3.1 billion in a year, although it wasn't technically salary, it was share options and all sorts of things. But the reality is, at the beginning of the year he had X, at the end of the year he had 3.1 billion plus X. And you compare that to somebody who's earning 3,500, it's thousands and thousands of times difference. It's unreal, it's just crazy. I sort of did the numbers. If you take 3.1 billion and then you compare that to one of the, I think it's 20 million South Africans, 10 million South Africans who live below the food poverty line, it would take them 800,000 years to earn that salary. Now, humans have only been running around on this planet for about 200,000 years. So it's 4 times the amount of time that humans have been on the planet for one person to earn what another person has earned. It's insane.
No, it's ridiculous.
I mean, it defies any kind of reason.
And it's problematic morally and ethically, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, I would challenge anybody to say that there's not a moral problem with that. And I think the argument will come from sort of mainstream economists. It's not a moral issue, but it is a moral issue.
Of course it is.
What's
it's
not a moral issue when humans are concerned?
But coming back to the question of the ratings issue, you spoke, I mean, the ratings agencies, and referring to this as populist steps rather than poverty eradication, and the focus, of course, of a state should be to listen to the voice of its majority and, of course, to enhance the standard of living of its people. What is your opinion of the rating agencies, and do you think that it is, for example, like, you know, somebody posted on Twitter and said that the ratings agencies are all about this, you know, that, you know, you can't go into populist policies, but why is the state there in the first place, if not to create an equitable and just society? And secondly, South Africa has like the 6th highest earning CEO in the world, and now we're disputing on 3,500 rands as a minimum wage. Is this all linked to your understanding and your critique of capitalism and how it operates to actually continue with exploitation?
Yeah, so I mean, ratings agencies, I'm not sure about capitalism, but ratings agencies represent a very interesting kind of nexus between capitalism and government in this global sort of sphere. They're not technically governments, they don't form part of government processes, they're not democratically elected in any way. They represent a tiny minority of
super elite,
people
I would say,
who would be the super elite, the most wealthy of the wealthy, and they have this just incredibly disproportionate influence on local like activities, how governments organize themselves. You know, and we're obviously at the moment we're just obsessed with a downgrade to a junk status in South Africa, and I'm sure the same sort of thing has happened all over the world. And it seems that we're prepared to do anything to just
avoid that.
And so we'll sell our souls, we'll sell our mothers, we'll sell our children to avoid this ratings downgrade. And I'm just, you know, it's unacceptable. It's like completely undemocratic. It's completely, you know, not negotiated, not discussed, not thought through at a local level, not influenced by local issues. I mean, yeah, so on a, you know, from a justice perspective, it's just completely wrong.
So you've touched on justice again, and I see that you focus a lot on morals and ethics, and of course justice, because sometimes morality and the law might not equal justice, you know. And so how do you view these very contested concepts in terms of economics, in terms of poverty and upliftment?
Well, I mean, I'm increasingly becoming Marxist, and so I'm increasingly becoming, or coming to the view that the starting point for getting justice right is an economic egalitarianism. That's the basic starting point. It doesn't have to stay egalitarian forever. It doesn't say that you can't move from egalitarianism if you can find stuff that's in everybody's benefit beyond egalitarianism, but that should be the starting point. And as soon as you have that, then you have to be pretty dramatic. I mean, I certainly will become impoverished significantly if ever my theoretical thoughts on this, my thinking on this were to become practice. But actually, you know, if we're going to be honest with it, people should all have an inherent intrinsic value, or be inherently and intrinsically valued by society, by each other. I think that's a basic starting point, and from there you can maybe negotiate incentives for certain performances, but it's a bit of a slippery slope from there. So yeah, and I guess that's probably
okay. So you hold that thought, because when we come back, I want to take this a little further. We'll see you after the break.
بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار الظلم وحلا في مولده النغم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار الظلم وحلا في مولده النغم.
Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the second segment of Finding Me, today on the ITV networks with Professor Neil. And we've been talking about the different discussions and of course the different ways of viewing how society operates, how governments respond to the injustices that we find ourselves trapped in. And Professor Neil has developed a fascinating module for the economic management science students, which looks at sustainability and greed through different lenses. And we're unpacking those various concepts. Now, Professor, before you went into the break, you said you're increasingly becoming a Marxist. What does that entail?
Well, I mean, I think as a starting point, it entails critique.
Right.
I mean, we live in a society today where, at a popular level, I think most people think that capitalism is the ultimate answer to everything, all of the world's problems, that we accept whatever capitalism delivers to us. We can't imagine anything other than capitalism. And there's a problem with that because there's just so much wrong with the world. If we accept that capitalism is the answer to everything, was the only possible answer, and then we look around and we see, you know, the inequality we spoke about earlier, we see environmental degradation, so which is kind of intergenerational inequality emerging. You just have to say there must be something else. There must be another way of looking at it. And so, I mean, Marxism as a starting point is about critique, right? It's about criticism of what is. And for me, that's what Marx has initially provided. You know, and then Marx presents views on ways to manage things which are different. I mean, Marx, you know, suggested more egalitarian mechanisms of managing the world, more fair mechanisms of managing the world. And in some instances, they were quite profoundly corrupted, but, you know, by the likes of Stalin and whatever.
Yes.
But I actually think the key thing is to just be unsettled about where we are. I don't necessarily have the answers. I don't think Marx necessarily had the answers.
Yeah, because
Marx said there's a problem, and I think we need to accept there's problems today, and we can't just say all's rosy. We can't just say economic growth is going to solve our problems, because economic growth is not solving our problems. Actually, there's general evidence that our environmental degradation is increasing, and inequality is not being resolved through this growth magic. And so I think as a society we need to look at the world critically. We need to look at the big story, the simple answers which are thrown at us by kind of pop economists to the world's problems, and say, is that okay? And that's, you know, that's the real benefit of what Marx does.
Listening to what you've said, there's been many decolonial scholars recently who've come out, you know, who said that yes, certainly Marx had a lot of valuable contributory, you know, ideas, but that these ideas need to be reworked in each place in which you are in. For example, in Africa, you take Marx and look at it and say, what is of value, and how can we then expand on this to make it more beneficial? It's not a one theory fits all kind of a practice. Do you believe that that is also necessary for academics to do in South Africa? Because the minute you mention Marx today, there's, you know, Marxism has failed everywhere. What are these people coming with, you know, obsolete ideas, etc.? They haven't been able to provide anything fascinating or anything challenging or opposing to capitalism, for instance.
Well, yeah, I mean, okay, the challenge to capitalism is quite fascinating from the left, but I'll try and remember to go back.
Okay.
But you know, as I said, Marx for me is primarily critique, you know.
And this unsettling.
And this unsettled, and as soon as you critique, then from critique, you are then empowered to start thinking about something else, whatever that may be.
Yes.
I mean, whether it's like, I don't know, Marxist Leninism, whatever the path you want to go down. I must mention Castro, whether it's the Cuban model, you know, may he rest in peace. Whatever the model is that works. I think all society operates like that. You kind of muddle along. But the first step to muddling better is to be able to criticize what is, to be able to
recognize firstly there's a problem.
The problems.
Yes.
Because if you don't recognize the problems, you're not even going to challenge the solution.
Right.
So for me, that's the, you know, the essence of Marx. And there was something else that I wanted to say, and I've forgotten what it was, as I'm getting old. But anyway,
the challenge of the left. Okay.
Pardon?
You were going to refer to the challenge from the left.
Oh, well, that's the fascinating thing. So, I mean, we've just had the elections in America, and people are saying capitalism is won, but actually no. I mean, Trump didn't get elected on a capitalist ticket. I mean, no capitalist in their right mind will want to shut off a surplus army of cheap labor, and no capitalist in their right mind will shut down, you know, free trade agreements. Those are just the essential ingredients to the flow of capital. What Trump got elected in on was a fascist argument, you know, an extremely right-wing fascist argument. You know, that seems what the majority of Americans, or at least in their electoral system, have voted for, which is fascinating if you know any history. So the simple history is 1930s Great Depression, late 1930s the rise of fascism, and 1940 the Second World War. I mean, now we've had the Great Depression of the 2000s. We've got the rise of fascism in America and in Europe.
Oh, we're heading for Brexit. The Great Third World War.
Is there a Third World War coming?
Yeah.
But what's fascinated me is that there's this crisis which we're perceiving, but there's been no stand-up left-wing response to it. Where are the socialists? Where are the Marxists in the world today? I mean, the right is dominating. We're not going from this kind of neoliberal position left. We're going from the neoliberal position right. And I mean, I've sort of the kind of, I think it's perhaps a long shadow of the success of the Cold War PR machine. You know, I think you mentioned that people hear people saying Marx and they think, what has Marx got to tell you? And that, I mean, that argument is really the argument that was constructed in the Cold War, that Marx has nothing to say to the world, because that was convenient for a particular ideological bloc, and the opposing ideological bloc was pretty poor at articulating its view. But it seems to me that the left is almost nowhere. It's still licking its wounds from the collapse of the Soviet Union, instead of saying, well, actually we do have something to offer there. There are leftist approaches which are not Stalinist, you know, which don't have all the evils of kind of that very badly totalitarian sort of Soviet model, or, you know, whatever the case may be. So it's a surprise, and I you know, I'm not an activist or anything, so I'm not going to be out there on the streets, but I
think you're an activist in your education system in the way you teach.
Yeah, maybe one of my students will start a leftist party as they emerge.
So what now, taking all of this and this failure of the left to rise and the failure of this critique and of articulating a voice, would you then say part of the problem is education, the way in which people are taught, what they're taught, and then coming now, I'm bringing this right back home to Fees Must Fall and the call for free quality, decolonial education. So to allow the different voices into each sphere, and then of course to challenge and to increase the kind of critique that we do. And lastly, do you agree that South Africa needs a Fees Must Fall, that it's possible to have free quality education? Okay, so lots and lots of questions in that one question. Let me start at the end. The end is do we need and can we afford? Can we afford, first of all? And I think the try to answer is, can we afford not to have an education, the education of the people of the country? I think, and so my simple answer is, we can't afford not to. And the question then is, how do we pay for it? And we pay for it, if you want to be very simple about it, we pay for it by taxing people. I mean, it's as simple as that. And I think to some extent, I think we've gotten hung up on a bit of an emotional argument around, we can't give free education to the rich. You know, that's the sticking point at the moment. We find, and we're ignoring the majorities here. We find to give free education to the poor through NSFAS and whatever, but we have this fundamental barrier to we won't give free education. That's wrong. I mean, the question actually should be, who should pay for all education? The rich should pay for everybody's education. And the best way to do that is to tax the rich. Yes. I mean, it's as simple as that. You tax the rich, and they may not like it, but I mean, we're probably the rich in this room. And I know that if I was going to pay an extra probably 5, 10, 15, 20% of tax actually, and I knew my children were going to get to a decent school first of all and get a decent tertiary education, whatever they could qualify for, it's okay. So if there's free quality education for everyone, you tax the rich to make it happen. And you don't try and impose all the administrative burden of means tests on universities. I mean, the current suggestions from the Minister of Higher Education are sending universities into an absolute flat spin because they just don't know how to evaluate people's incomes. There's all sorts of, do we go to SARS? Do we get the SARS databases? But then it's not the individual's income, it's the household income. How do we determine the household income? What if the person doesn't live in the household? What if there's 7 people in the household who are at a university? It's just incredibly complicated thing. Just tax the damn rich. Those super rich chief executives who earn over $1 million should be paying 70, 80, 90% tax on every rand. And that might sound outlandish, but I was recently told to look at the tax rates in the US over the last 100 years. And it's only in the last sort of the second half of the 20th century that tax rates dropped below 70%. It was up until or between sort of up to 1980s, I think. Up until 1980s, it was above 70%, and for much of the 50s, it was above 90% on as a marginal tax rate. So why is that outrageous? And
you know, America's greatness, because there's a lot of problems. But America's rise and to some kind of national global power status was really associated with that. It was associated with a redistribution. So free education, absolutely, and we can afford it.
How we teach?
How we teach, it's difficult. I mean, how we teach is an ever-shifting kind of
debate.
What I can say quickly is I think there's another obsession in our education landscape, and it's the obsession with science, engineering, and technology, which I think ought to be questioned. So a lot of resources, a lot of emphasis goes into science, engineering, and technology. Actually, if you look at what a lot of philosophers will argue, there's really two problems humans face. One is overcoming the powers of nature, and they typically do that with science, engineering, and technology. And the other is how we use our technology in a manner which is good and in the interests of society. And so I think we need a much bigger emphasis on that aspect of our education, how we use the technology we already have. We already have the technology to survive. We already have the technology to kill ourselves. It's how do we use that technology? So and I think that resides in humanities rather than science, engineering, and technology. And so I think that sort of shift is probably something which we ought to contemplate. Yeah.
Okay, so we're at the end of the interview, and I'd like to say thank you very much, but I'm glad that you brought about this, the whole idea that there needs to be a shift, without a doubt.
Yeah.
We cannot stay, the status quo cannot prevail, isn't
Absolutely.
it? So thank you very much for sharing this time and for sharing your insights.
It's a pleasure.
في أمان الله والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
ودين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء قسما بالله رب العالمين ما ارتضينا غير دين الله دين فهو دين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء
هذا الدر وهذه الكلم بمديح الهادي تنطلق